You guys are coming in for building number 2 on the 97th floor. People trapped.
90 what floor? We're all around the building. We're completely around the building. We're into the building now, okay?
2,000 people were trapped in the north and south towers.
Out by the door to block the smoke and stay where you are. We're sending people upstairs. The fire department's coming upstairs.
Firefighters from across New York were sent to the scene.
They're coming. They're coming. They're downstairs. They're on the way.
Knowing what he might soon face, fireman Walter Hines left a hurried voice message for his wife.
I got almost every fireman in the city coming to help you.
Message. Hi, Ron, it's me. Just want to let you know I love you and the girls. Tell my mom to, we're going down to that trade center thing, the second plane that just crashed into that building. So we're on our way down there. I love you. I'll talk to you later.
Walter knew this was so serious. I could tell from the sound of his voice. He knew this was something he might not get out of. And I think that he just needed to let us know that he loved us. The voice message that Walter left is still on his business phone, which I've kept in his office. I've probably listened to the message hundreds of times. Everybody has told me that has lost loved ones that you lose the sound of their voice, that you can't remember the sound of people's voices after they've gone. And I tend to think that that's true. I think it's a good reminder to have Walter's message for my daughters that they can continue to hear him.
While some messages provide consolation, others are a painful reminder of a missed opportunity to say goodbye.
I woke up to my telephone ringing. I worked nights at the time, so I didn't want to be bothered. And then my cell phone rang again. And I'm like, I'm not going to answer it. I'd say it was probably about 1 o'clock in the afternoon that my cell phone rang with a message.
First saved message.
Neil, it's Brian. A plane crashed into the trade center. It's on fire, and I'm in it. And I can't breathe. Tell everyone I love them. I don't get out of here.
End of message.
Brian left that message, and that must have been the first or second phone call that I received that morning. And I mean, I just didn't realize it. It's really hard to struggle with, what would have happened if I answered the phone? But I mean, I couldn't do anything, even if I did answer it.
First saved message.
I keep the message on an MP3 file, so I have it on CD, I have it hidden away in a safe, I have it, on every hard drive I have it like everywhere just so that nothing happens to it. It's Brian's last words. I mean, that's one of the reasons why recordings were made, was so people could record their last words. I think it gives me a little bit of guidance. I draw from Brian's strength when I hear the message.
Just 3 floors below Brian Nunez in the North Tower was Melissa Harrington Hughes. She was trapped on the 101st floor. Shortly after the first plane had hit her building, Melissa had called her father. But 55 minutes later, he'd heard nothing since.
When we stopped our conversation, I thought she sounded in control of herself, and knowing my daughter Melissa the way I knew her, I didn't think she would have any problem getting out of the building.
Whilst Melissa's father watched the events unfolding at home, her only brother Michael was at his office in Boston when he heard the news.
I just started crying and just couldn't believe it. And really couldn't muster any words to anybody. I kind of had to go back up to work and say, I gotta go. I was just thinking, I hope she got out. I hope she got out. Either by a stairs, elevator, maybe they were gonna bring helicopters, I didn't know. My sister was very protective of me. I can't say growing up I realized it, because as a younger brother, you're always thinking the negative when you're younger. You get mad, you get upset. I don't like you, get away from me, the typical brother-sister thing. But as time progressed, she looked out for me tremendously.
He knew you jerk, it was working?
No, it wasn't working. But you know what?
What?
It's working now.
The relationship between Melissa and my father when she was growing up kind of in the teenage high school years was probably hostile at times. You gotta think, two people with the same traits, both strong-willed, nothing's ever gonna be easy. He was probably the only person she couldn't win against, was my father, and I think her traits came from him. Her drive and her strong-willed.
Growing up, Melissa had always been determined to experience life beyond her small-town roots in Massachusetts.
Melissa spent the summer in France. She had the idea that Paris was the greatest city in the world, loved the clothes, loved the hairstyles. She had long hair. When she came back, her hair was very short. That was a style in Paris. When she got off the airplane, her mother and I looked at her and we were like, we didn't expect that.
Aged 26, Melissa moved to California to work for a large internet communications company.
Melissa was a very ambitious young lady. When she was in California, she bought a BMW. I was like 60 years old when she bought the BMW. I'd never had a car as nice as that. I said to her, Melissa, can you afford it? She said, Dad, I may never have an opportunity to buy one again. She bought it. She loved it. She wasn't here that long, but she had a wonderful time in the 31 years that she was here. She always aimed for the best, and most of the time she got it.
After speaking to her father, Melissa rang her husband, Sean, in San Francisco, to whom she'd been married for just a year. He was asleep when she called.
Sean, it's me. I just wanted to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. There's lots of smoke, and I just wanted you to know that I love you always.
Melissa met John at a junior club dance. That's basically how they started their relationship. He was a very nice young man, and they were an extremely attractive couple.
I could tell when she introduced me to him, her eyes just kind of glowed, and I could tell right away that he was probably the one that she was going to marry, and she did.
Your kiss as a sign of their new married love may present you for the first time Mr. and Mrs. Sean Hughes.
When I heard her message to Sean, I heard in her voice hopelessness. She was telling Sean that this is it, Sean, for me, but I'll love you forever, buddy.
I don't know if I could say it was a good thing. It was good to hear her voice. Good to see that she called her husband. Emotional when you heard it. All sorts of different emotions coming out. Obviously sad because you're assuming when you hear it that she can't get out, but like I said, good emotions because I could hear her voice. It's always good to hear the voice.
An hour after the first plane struck the North Tower, some people were still struggling to make their first contact with loved ones. The phone networks were overloaded. By the time 41-year-old Tom McGuinness managed to get through to his wife, he already knew there was no possibility of escape.
Right away I say, "Where are you? Where are you?" And I'm almost annoyed because he's not answering me. And then he says, we're in a conference room that we can't get out of. We're trapped in a conference room. And I said, well, who's with you? And he rattles off the names of a couple of guys I know, 3 guys that were with him, plus these other people. And you could hear it in the background. You could hear people talking. You didn't hear panic. You heard, I remember one guy yelling, let's just knock down this goddamn wall. I remember telling him, I said, you're going to get out of there. I kept telling him that. And that's when he said to me, he goes, Ileana, you don't understand. He says, there are people jumping from the floors above us. And that's when I just thought, oh my God. Like, what are these guys going through that they are seeing what's going on right above them? And it was just unbelievable. And I just kept saying, you're coming home tonight. You're coming home tonight. And he said, I love you. And he said, take care of Caitlin. He said, I have to get down on the floor. I love you. And that's when I lost the connection at that point. There is a great comfort in the fact that I got to talk to him. And the funny thing about that comfort is it was not a great comfort that day or even, weeks later. But it's a great comfort now. It was a great comfort months later. And the reason it was a great comfort is because, it's not so much for me, but I feel that it was for him. It was his chance to say goodbye, his chance to say, take care of Caitlin. He said, it'll be a miracle if we get out of here. He knew he wasn't going to get out.
In the South Tower, the second to be hit, conditions were now desperate. Stephen Muldery worked alongside a group of close college friends, all former high school athletes. As the fire spread, the group made a collective decision to stick together and try and reach the roof. They now faced a grueling 21-story climb up the stairwells through heat and smoke.
Stephen was passionate about basketball, but he was tiny and slight. I have a picture of him in 8th grade when he was devoted to basketball. And he is standing between 2 fully grown classmates who were his best friends. And he looks like he's the mascot, and he wasn't. He hung in there. I feel basketball was a critical element in the person he grew to be. He never lost the fire or the desire. I saw it in the aftermath of Stephen's death, when the loyalty of all the people he had played basketball with was made evident to me. And I saw the gifts that had come from the teamwork.
Stephen and his friends reached the top of the building, but the doors to the roof were locked. They retreated back down the stairwells and took refuge in an empty conference room on the 88th floor. Sharing a single mobile phone, each one took turns to say their goodbyes.
Stephen and others passed the phone around and let people get word out to their family members. And at this point, there was a sense of dread among those people making the calls. There was a sense that they were doomed. People used their last minutes of conversation to talk with their families and their loved ones and their friends. They said, you made my life better, I want you to take care of so-and-so. I want you to, know this about the truth of our lives. And it was a kind of a moment of truth for many people, a moment of desperate truth, but also transcendent truth. "65 minutes after the North Tower was hit, a string of desperate calls was still being made from the building. For the family of 37-year-old Jeffrey Nussbaum, his struggle to live is documented in agonizing detail.
My phone rang, and it was Jeff. And Jeff told me that the room is filling up with smoke. It was difficult for them to breathe. He told me the sprinkler systems went off and they were like ankle deep in water. When you're so emotionally involved, you don't look at your wristwatch. And the phone company sent me a breakdown of his phone bill. I waited over 2 years for him to be identified. So anything is cherishable to me. And what was identified was so microscopic that you hold on to everything, even the telephone bill.
By 10 o'clock, the rescue operation had made very little progress. The fire department had been blighted by malfunctioning radio receivers within the towers. Once inside on the stairwells, the firefighters could not communicate with each other. But that silence was about to be broken.
Someone was able to make the radio receiver work. And we have a remarkable, illuminating document of the effort to get up to the high floors in the South Tower.
Battalion 7 on floor 40 of Tower 2. We got one elevator working up to the 40th floor, staffed by a member of Line 15.
The man who repaired the radio receiver was 45-year-old Oreo Palmer. As Chief of Battalion 7, Palmer was amongst the first to arrive at the scene. As he entered the South Tower, he single-handedly fixed an elevator and took it to the 40th floor, halfway to where almost 700 people were struggling to stay alive.
And then he started to climb on foot. And because he was a very, very fit man, he was able to make tremendous progress. He had run marathons, he ran half marathons.
We're on the 43rd floor, near Stairway B. What floor should we try to get up to, Oreo? I'm up to 5'5".
He went 12 floors in 10 minutes, wearing all the bunker gear, which at 50 or 60 pounds.
We're going to have to host it. I'm on 69 now, so we need a higher bank, These stairway walls have been compromised on 73 and 74. The walls are breached, so be careful.
When I first heard Oreo's voice on the tapes, you can tell he knows he's in a race against time.
Oreo's conserving his oxygen, he's conserving his energy. That's why there's not a lot of chatter on his part on the tape.
Six more to go.
During his ascent, Palmer discovered that one stairwell, the south, was still intact all the way to the impact zone and beyond. For the hundreds trapped there, this stairwell could have been an escape route.
What stair are you in, Oreo? South Tower, South Tower.
The 78th floor in the South Tower was the bridge point between living and the dead. It was a transfer spot in the elevator system, and a lot of people had massed there. And when the second plane hit, a lot of them were killed outright, a lot of them were injured and waiting for help. And Oreo Palmer was rising and racing to that point to get to them.
We got tanks. I saw the pockets of fire. We should be able to knock it down with 2 lines. They know that. 78th floor, numerous 1045 cold lines. 478. Numerous civilians, they got 2 engines up there. All right, 10-4, we're on our way.
And Oriole got up there pretty quick. Anyone who was wounded or dying, to know somebody was able to get up there, they knew there had to be a way out. The people who were there at the point of impact, to have seen him, I can only imagine there must have been some elation or euphoria that's probably undescribable.
Maybe.
Just to see him and realize there's some hope here, thanks to this guy who just made it up here.
When I heard the tapes, you were watching a screen with all the words on it, but with a digital countdown, so you knew exactly what was coming. You knew the exact minute that the towers were going to go down. And you can't help but feel like you want to jump out of your seat and say, hurry up and get out of there. You know, you have one more minute before it comes down. And that's the hard part. That was the hard part. I was not surprised when I heard that Oreo had made it to the 78th floor. He made it up to the point of impact, and it's amazing. He left a story behind. My kids will have it, their kids will have it, and I just feel that it's to honor his memory and the person that he was.
7 minutes after Palmer's last words, the South Tower would collapse. There is one 911 call which captures this moment from inside the building. It highlights the moral complexity of hearing the suffering of those trapped. From the 105th floor of the South Tower, father of three, Kevin Cosgrove, was still speaking up until the moment when the tower fell.
His words haunt me, and I try not to think about it, but it's also, in a way, kind of a comfort to know where he was and what he went through and what he was trying to do. And not many people have that.
Parts of Kevin's call were deliberately made public when it was played by the prosecution in the trial of a key 9/11 terrorist. It was used to illustrate the human suffering on that day.
The first copy of it wasn't cleaned up at all. There was a lot of background noise, and it was hard to hear what he was saying. And it was certainly hard to listen to him not being able to breathe very well.
Smoke, right there, 105, 2 power. All right, sit tight. We'll get to you as soon as we can. There's some staying up, the smoke's really bad now. It's barely leave. That's all we can do. Where are you? What floor are you guys up to? We're getting there. We're getting there. Doesn't feel like it, man. I got young kids. I understand that, sir. I got lots of people up here. I understand. And then you got a lot in the building, but we're up on the top. Smoke rises, it's right there. We're on the floor. We're in a window. And then I had to barely breathe now. Can't see. Okay. Just try to hang in there. I'm going to stay with you. You say you're in an air-conditioned building. It's really bad. It's black. It's iron. We're young men. We're not ready to die. I understand. Hello? Hello? We're looking at financial center. 3 of us, 2 broken windows.
His building began to collapse. It was the first one to fall. Some people said, you know, hearing Kevin's words has made the events of 9/11 more human for them, that there were really people in there and it wasn't just buildings. One lady called him the voice from the towers. It made it real for her, that it wasn't just a news story. It seemed like it was just a movie, but then when they heard Kevin speaking, realized this was a real thing with real people inside.
For Wendy Cosgrove, there is comfort from the fact that almost 10 minutes of the call were not played in court.
I'm glad that I have some that are just my own private memories that I don't have to share with the world. Because it is rather hard to share my husband's last words with the entire world. So it's nice to have something a little private. I guess what I would want people to learn from listening to the recording is that life is short, that you never know when you're going to lose your loved ones, and to spend every minute you can showing them that love. And that's what's important in life.
After 62 minutes, the South Tower, although the second to be hit, was the first to fall. Almost 1,000 civilians and firefighters died. Along with Kevin Cosgrove, they included Brad Fetchit, Shimmy Beagleisen, firefighter Walter Hines, Battalion Chief Oreo Palmer, and Stephen Muldery.
The phone rang and it was Amy, my youngest daughter. And the first thing I said to her was, "Where's Stephen?" And she didn't answer. There was just silence.
I got home and I called my mother, and she was so happy to hear my voice. And I told her about Stephen. And I just know she just screamed, and that was it.
She knew he was gone. And a sound came out of me that I'd never heard in my life. It was just an animal sound. And I knew when I heard that sound for the first time in my life, that howl, that it was universal. And that, you know, my family and I had joined all the losses of all the ages.
Mom, it's Stephen. My plane, my building got hit by a plane, and right now it's, I think I'm okay, I'm safe now.
The message that he left for me meant everything to me. I mean, I clung to it. I listened to it repeatedly in the days after. But I did put it aside at a certain point and say that I would not continue to do that. And a very odd thing happened, and it is that as time went by, I created a new message that had never been left. I added to what he had left, thinking he had left it. In his message to me, he said, "I'll be all right, and I will call you." In the message that I then began living with, you know, maybe a year after, was, "I'll be all right, and you will too." I made him say it in my memory over and over and over again.
George, have them mobilize the Army. We need the Army in Manhattan. All right, all units stand by. Everybody try to calm down.
Although the first to be hit, the North Tower was still standing. For those with loved ones trapped inside, the collapse of the South Tower was a terrifying premonition.
When the first tower went down, I was hoping that Melissa had gotten out of the building.
Nodding to the location, off-duty members.
I knew she was not in that tower.
Dad really wanted her to call back. Sean had told us that she had called him. He really wanted her to call back again. And just nervously anxious was the way I viewed him.
As a parent, you always want to have hope. I thought that if there was a way to get out of the building, that Melissa, at that point in time, that she would have been out of the building.
I was on the phone with one of Jim's friends when the first tower collapsed. All you could hear if you listened in on the call was just crying and wailing. And then this, after about 5 or 10 minutes of that, this sense of calm that, oh wait, that's not his tower. It feels strange to report on the events of that day that we just isolated Jimmy's safety and how we could distance ourselves from the horrific event and the casualties that everybody else faced. But that felt like our duty.
My parents were down in Florida on September 11th. They were not watching television until I told them to turn it on. My father was counting the floors to see, because he saw it on television. He was trying to figure out if Jim was above or below where the plane had hit. The first thing my father said to me was, he was such a great father. You know, and I said, that makes it real, because for me to think he's not going to make it out is one thing, but for my father to say that, because if it's in the past, that made it real, more real for me, that this was really, his life was ending.
At 10:28, 102 minutes after it was hit, the North Tower fell.
I saw the tower fall. Yeah, I saw the tower fall down, and I knew for sure I'd never hear from him again. I saw his life end right there.
I felt, my heart had been ripped from my body. I can't ever remember feeling that sadness ever in life, or that much emotion and tears, and nor do I hope I ever will.
My wife Beverly was working, teaching school in Chicopee. I had to drive to Chicopee to inform my wife that Melissa was in the North Tower. We were listening to the whole thing on the radio when we were driving back, and on our way home, the North Tower collapsed. My wife asked me to shut the radio off. I shut the radio off, and we came home and cried together.
When the North Tower collapsed, 1,402 civilians were killed. Along with Melissa Harrington Hughes and Jim Gartenberg, they included Christopher Hanley, Brian Nunez, Jeffrey Nussbaum, and Tom McGuinness.
The question really about the Trade Center is, what are our memories made out of? Are they made out of images and myths? Are they made out of the hard facts? The audible record of that day is essential, because if history is going to be a tool for the living, if memory is going to be something that we can rely on, then you can't blink, you can't turn away. You have to say, this is what happened, and this is how it happened.
For the families, the pain of September the 11th may never recede. But now that several years have passed, they are beginning to understand the profound legacy of their loved one's final words.
My mother is very philosophical. She doesn't get stuck by something like this. I think she recognizes it and sort of absorbs it and tries to make the most of it, and she looks forward. So she's doing well, I think.
The world doesn't stop for every tragic loss of life. And, you know, I kind of wish the world could. The world gets too busy. And I understand. You can't. You'd be in constant grieving. It's too easy for me to fall into a place where life is only about endurance. And I think that's a very poor way to live life. It's ignoring all the gifts you're given. And I didn't want to be that way. I didn't want to be that way. And, you know, I can say that I don't think I have.
Jim called me, instantaneously as soon as it happened. His first response was, he needs to talk to me. To have his voice, just to have his voice it's nice. Even though it's panic mode, it's some last memories.
Good job, Nicole. Keep going.
When Jim passed away, I was 3 months pregnant. Here I am with this special gift, as far as I'm concerned, that he left me with. And to me, that's so important that we had that. She has his personality, she's quick-witted, and her sense of humor is just like him.
You're fast. Good job.
So knowing that, she's such a part of him, and that my other child's such a part of him, it makes me happy, that part.
I was the last one from the outside world to talk to Melissa. We were able to say how much we loved each other, and I think of it constantly, all of the time.
Ever since Melissa's passing, I don't want to put a good spin on it, but it's changed him. It's made him more aware of things, I should say. He's more loving man now than he was before. Didn't show his feelings as much before, and now he does. Like with my son, who was, coincidentally, which was kind of fate, I would have to say, was born on September 11th.
When you leave the face of this earth, all you leave are your children. That's your legacy. Melissa brought a lot of joy into our lives. My inner peace with Melissa's death might come from the fact that I spoke to her. I find a lot of pleasure knowing that Melissa called me, knowing that we were able to say our last goodbyes, basically. I got to talk to Melissa in person, I'll take that to my grave.